John, I want you to talk about those two issues I mentioned, teacher pay and budgets, but I also want you to offer some perspective on how what you're hearing from Heath and what you know of North Carolina dovetails with what's going on elsewhere.
So money is always a big issue in education, primarily because it is how we pay people and bring intellectual talent to the table. But the bigger issue, I think, in higher education, as opposed to teacher pay, is really student debt. And how we're going to support access to higher education for our students across the board in a variety of different populations without dramatically changing somebody's ability to have a welfare life in an employed situation moving forward. So student debt this year will crest $1 trillion in this country. It's one of those kind of scary benchmarks that you take a look at. I think that what has been driving the conversation in higher ed in regards to money has been this increasing debt load, and the economy since 2008 really has also driven kind of a lot of people to struggle to find jobs or to find better jobs. Education has always been the portal, higher education has always been the portal to the middle class for people who haven't had the pleasure of being in the middle class. But increasingly, I think this most recent recession and the mounting student debt and the pressure on public budgets have all really kind of stimulated a conversation, and you hear it out of the Governor McCrory's comments yesterday around funding formulas for higher education. And it really begs the question of accountability, and is this education actually going to be worthwhile, and does it actually lead to viable employment? And there's a pretty healthy conversation right now about the value proposition of higher education. Is it worth borrowing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for your undergraduate education, and will there be a payoff at the end of that? And the payoff obviously isn't a job. So there's a direct correlation here between your education, regardless of the discipline, and your ability to go out into the workplace and find gainful employment. One of the things that Northeastern has done as a national leader in our space has been our co-op program. We've led the country for the last 4 years now in job placement for our graduates. And it is directly tied back to our cooperative education model, where our students, over the course of their undergraduate, whether they are in the social sciences, in the humanities, or whether they're in engineering or in health sciences, all will spend considerable amount of their time out in the workforce for 6-month periods, 2, 3 co-ops during their undergraduate career. And so by the time they graduate, they don't only have an intuitive understanding of what it takes to be out in the workforce, but they also bring that back into the classroom. So, and you're starting to see co-op and internships becoming much more pervasive in higher ed. So it isn't that higher ed isn't responding to the price pressures that exists in public funding, but it is a very complicated scenario. You do need to still educate a population across a broad swath. You can't just focus on engineering or health sciences, because our economy needs the creative arts as much as it needs the science community. So it isn't about segregating high yield, high performing degree programs, but really figuring out the right mix for the general population. And you know, that communication that goes back and forth between our students and the corporate community through co-op really informs us a great deal. And it is more of the conversation that Heath has modeled with the K through 12 having a conversation with the larger community, whereas higher ed has to go out and have a conversation with a larger business and employment community. And you know, we're seeing a lot of signs that I'm very hopeful on of that happening. The other big cost factor really is technology and how we leverage education and different modes of education. There's been an awful lot in the press recently about MOOCs and that open access of education. And the business model still isn't there to sustain that activity.
That's the online teaching.
That's the online teaching and led by you know, groups like Stanford and MIT. We've been in online education for more than 20 years at Northeastern. So we're very comfortable in that space, but a lot of traditional higher education hasn't been there. One of the biggest costs of higher education is dislocation. When a student has to quit their job, relocate to another community, and work and go without work for 2 years while they do a master's program, on a traditional campus, if you can provide that education in an online environment where they don't have to dislocate, sell their home, or if they don't have to relocate or quit their job, that's a huge cost savings to that student, even though the cost of the education doesn't change very much. So there's I think over the next decade, you're going to see in higher education a very, some people are calling it disruptive. I think it's more evolutionary than that. Distance education has been with us for over 20 years. Some people have just recognized it in the last 2 years. You know, I think you will see models emerge where education is delivered at a price point that is considerably less to the student and much more economical. And there's also going to be kind of a much more heavy emphasis in that industry alignment that I was mentioning a little earlier.
So I think I'm hearing you say that you do think there is some fairness in measuring the worth of higher education by what you can go out and do with that degree afterwards.
So most of what we teach our students in the classroom, the content that we're teaching our students in a university classroom, knowledge is changing so quickly that 5-10 years out, most of that knowledge is obsolete. So really the value of an education is not about the content that you're going to be distributing to the students in the classroom, but it's really educating them as to how to think, how to strategize, how to analyze the information that's coming towards them. So it isn't, you know, I'm not convinced that universities will be replaced by modules of courses online where people take them for free and then go off and do whatever, because at the end of the day, the value of an education is really about educating people not only what to know, but how to know. It's taking that information and distilling it and figuring out what are the nuggets of information that I really need to be successful. And so I'm not a huge advocate of doing huge changeovers in funding models, only because where there are examples, the California system about 15 years ago was a good example, where they had a major shift in the funding formula for higher education, and it had dramatic negative impact on that system with hardly any of the benefits that they were intending for. So before we do kind of widespread changes in funding formulas, we need to understand the unintended consequences of those. But I think increasingly, I think everybody needs to understand what the value proposition is of an education.
Okay, can we expand on that real quick? Because I think I've always believed that in education we have a huge role in economic development. And so we have to work in K-12 collaboratively with higher education and economic development because we do have tasks to us to develop the workforce needs of our local community and state and our country. So then the question becomes, well, are we tasked to prepare that workforce needs of tomorrow, as in the day after today, or the workforce development needs of tomorrow 10, 15 years from now? Because when you look at the way that our workforce is changing in this country and the jobs that we're needing to fill tomorrow aren't necessarily going to be the jobs that are needing to be filled in 10 or 15 years. So the answer is we have to do both. We're just not very good at that as a country, and we have to get better because we're in a state right now with very high unemployment. We clearly need to get people back into jobs, and so there needs to be some vocational training to fill the jobs that currently are unfilled in our state. But we have to look even deeper to what are the workforce development needs 10 or 15 years from now. When my kids in kindergarten today hit the workforce, what are the jobs that they're going to be inheriting? And so when you look at futurists, I always love to see, well, what are the predicted future trends? What folks are saying is that young people will change their jobs 10 to 15 times over the course of their lifetimes. That's staggering. Kids in kindergarten today will be inventing jobs. They won't go looking for a job the way we did. They have to go create their own jobs. So what does that mean? Well, it means that there are some things that we have to stress at a way at K-12 and maybe even higher ed that we haven't stressed before. Creativity, innovation, entrepreneurial skills. They're going to become increasingly important for our young people in kindergarten today to be able to find jobs, but also to meet the workforce development needs of Charlotte, Mecklenburg, North Carolina, and the United States in the future. And so we have to do both. That's why it's not only an alignment between K-12 and higher ed, but K-12, higher ed, and workforce development so that we're really strategic about that. And then we also have to look at, well, how do we measure that and how do we fund it? So what should be the mechanisms for providing funding for K-12 and higher ed to do a good job with that, but also how do we have the right targets and measures so that we know that we're doing a good job on that trajectory?
Well, you mentioned economic development, and it's interesting because I'm sure you know this. Whenever I talk to business leaders, and you ask what do they need to be successful, it always comes back to the workforce, right? And that always comes back to education, and then that comes to this funding issue, which leads into taxes, which a lot of businesses don't enjoy paying. So I just want to get a little bit of perspective on whether you see either here or elsewhere that message sinking in and the cooperation that is necessary to make all those things connect.
I see that happening in a very real way at the community college level. Matter of fact, this community has one of the best community college systems in the country, and community colleges have figured out how to navigate the workforce development space as well as the educational space quite well. And there's some models within community colleges that I think the rest of higher education can learn from, as well as K through 12 could learn from. For example, I think not everybody is going to end up in a white-collar job. So, I think if you look at some of our school systems nationally, in some communities, they teach only towards college prep students. As a matter of fact, I have one of my children is probably not destined for higher education, and it's been a struggle to kind of find them a track within their high school environment that they can be happy and successful, because the school is very focused at the reward system of prestigious high school within a middle class community is the placement rates, and so they work to get all of their students placed within a higher educational system. That's the reward structure for them, and I think we need to start understanding these reward systems, implicit and explicit, that are within these systems. And community colleges, I think, have been doing a fantastic job with workforce development, but it's come through a much more engaged dialogue with industry. And I'm beginning to see, not only at Northeastern, where it's been part of the culture for quite some time, but I'm seeing it happening at all levels of higher education, where there's a much deeper understanding that what we do with our students in class really has to be informed by what they will be doing in the future, and making them successful, making our students successful. And so.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to ask you one final question, and I'm going to open it up because I have a feeling there are a lot of questions in the audience. But there was an economist from Wells Fargo recently who was speaking in town, and he addressed that issue you're talking about, which is almost every high school principal in every town in America stands up at graduation day and says we had 82% that are going to a four-year institution, and that's sort of the marker of whether things are working. Do we need to change that perspective?
It gets back to what I said before. What's the accountability to show that we are going to be successful on things we've been tasked to do? There has been a huge emphasis. Everybody throws out two of the most overused words in education today are college and career ready. We've probably got a better definition for what college ready means. I don't really believe that we've teased out career readiness, and what does that mean, and what careers, and what shows that we're doing a good job with that. One of the things I think it absolutely is the right conversation. I do worry about what the implications of that conversation are, because the reality in our country for a long time, we've had a very tracked system. It starts off in elementary school. You've got the golden eagles, you've got the sparrows, and then you got the buzzards, except we never call them but there's tracks of kids that come in behind, and they stay behind, they never get caught up. And then so you, by the virtue of what track you find yourself in, all the way back in elementary school, we can say that you might graduate, but you're never going to have an opportunity to go to college. You might graduate, but you're never going to have access to a high-end job. Now, for a while, maybe our country had the economy that could support that much of a workforce, but the reality is our workforce development, if you have a job that's easily duplicable, then it's going to be outsourced or it's going to be replaced by technology. So the jobs that used to be readily available for many of our students are going to disappear. So we're really increasingly going to have to respond to every student needs a diploma. Every student changing jobs 10 to 12 times is going to need some sort of probably post-secondary education, whether it's regularly in the college or part of their training in the jobs that they're going to have. And we've got to be very intentional about making sure that destiny and demography are not one and the same. I don't want a student's zip code to determine who's going to have access to higher education and who's going to get the vocational training. We have to be better than that. And there are some truths that we have to put on the table. There are some conversations we have to have. And they span many areas. I just, in terms of the last question you asked, you know, I get told all the time to run my school district like a business. Well, there's some aspects of that I think we can be more efficient. I think we can put in better process systems. I get that. But you know, I can't do one of the fundamental things a CEO of any business in town can do. Because one of the most important decisions you make as a business leader is the hours of operation. It's huge. When am I open? When am I closed? How do I best serve the needs of my customers? I know right now in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, over 50% of my primary customers, my students, come to us in poverty. The research is astoundingly clear that the loss of learning that they receive in the summer dramatically impacts them. They start behind and they never catch up because every time they get close, they take 3 months off where there's no learning, and then they come right back to school behind again. So simply by changing our hours, we could dramatically change the educational fortunes of many of our children. I don't have that ability at the majority of my schools. Now, our state legislature gave us that flexibility with our 9 Project Lift schools. We're very appreciative of that. But again, you know, setting the hours of operation, I can't do. Now, why? Because there are business industries in North Carolina that are worried about the impact of that on their industries. So when you sit at the table and say, don't increase our taxes, but then also don't let the school district use the resources that they have by doing something as simple as changing the calendar, that's not the kind of conversation we need to have. Let's sit at the table. And I need people to stand up and say, yes, Mr. Superintendent, I'm telling you, you can't change your hours of operation at schools. You may want to do it because it's going to negatively impact these industries. But we never talk about it, but everybody knows it's out there. Why aren't we talking about it? Why can't we have that kind of conversation? It will make us a better community. It will make us a better state. So I'm all about, you know, I'm not one of those people who says it's always about more resources. It's how we use resources, but it's allowing us as much flexibility as we can to use those resources wisely on behalf of students.
That answer brought to you by the North Carolina Tourism Lobby.
And I'm a big fan. I was coming down. My first foray into North Carolina was vacationing at the Outer Banks. It's a beautiful area. But
He now goes to Kiawah Island every. No, I'm kidding.
yeah.
So let's open it up to questions. I have a feeling this topic usually brings some questions. Yes, sir.
Dr. Heath, I wanted to ask about the recent articles in the Observer about Dr. Singleton, given the Brown decision in the 50s, the Spivey decision locally in the 70s, and the Leandro series of decisions in the 90s. Would you care to comment on the articles, the last article's assertion that white teachers don't like to discuss racism?
You know, what I find fascinating is, you know, I've been very open since I came to Charlotte-Meck and in my listening and learning tour that we are going to have to find ways as a school district to address issues of race and expectations. I think as a country, it's unfortunate that that's a topic that we tend to take a pass on in many, many different areas. We can't take a pass on that conversation in our school district because we are a majority-minority school district. And so we can't thoughtfully, as intellectual leaders in our industry, have a conversation about race and expectation. Then how do we have a simple conversation about how to close an achievement gap that clearly is delineated by race? So I think what we're trying to do is to figure out what's the appropriate way to, first of all, have a framework to have those difficult conversations so that they're not conversations to say we had the conversation, but that will lead to better outcomes for students. Ultimately, we want to have an opportunity to assess the cultural proficiency of our school district in every classroom and every school and our entire district to make sure that we're not doing things unintentionally that cause students not to learn at their highest levels. As a teacher in my early career, the quote-unquote diversity training that I was taught was to be colorblind. Well, that's, I mean, really, when you look at that, how silly is that? So, you know, what I find interesting is our local paper wants to do a story about a plan that we haven't even fleshed out yet. And then, of course, what people, the minute you have that topic on the table, people go to the extremes, where the lack of knowledge causes fear, distrust. So even the discussion of having the discussion causes angst and animosity. There has been no conversation about our teachers not wanting to do a great job with all students. I've been in so many of our classrooms. I think our teachers are doing a good job. They want to do a good job, but ultimately what we're talking about in Charlotte and Mecklenburg is having training around better instructional outcomes for students. So it's not wanting to lead a conversation about race in this area. It's about having a school district that is committed to having cultural proficiency as a hallmark to make sure that the differences of our students are celebrated, not attribution theories of deficits. So it's important. It's important that we do it well. It's important that we do it right, whoever we bring in. And what I think is bringing in folks that have expertise in this field, also working locally with leaders who have done great work in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. Bringing those individuals together will help us be a better school district. But I simply, as the leader, I can't see something that's that big a need and stay away from it because it's controversial. You know, it may not be the smartest thing in the world, but I don't ever try to be the smartest person in the room. I just, you know, I believe in we have to lead with our core values and beliefs, and we can't say every child, every day for a better tomorrow if we're not going to address outcomes and barriers that we're putting into place sometimes that cause every child in our school district not to have a better tomorrow.
I think the real takeaway is he wants you to go to charlottebusinessjournal.com and subscribe now. Who else?
Yes.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
I'd like to get your both of your perspectives on the use and what I perceive as almost a tension of reliance of technology by the students in the classroom. And should we embrace the technology and just move forward, or should we back off and say, no, you need to master this grammar and this mathematics versus just go to Google and learn how to just type it in and Google will tell you how to spell it. I see the pendulum going both ways. Just wanted to get your perspective on that use of technology, and then also would that impact and further widen the digital divide, or will it reduce it?
Yeah, you know, just from a higher ed perspective, and Heath here may have a very different perspective on this. I think if we've talked a lot today already about economic development and the relationship between education and the workforce, which, if you think about it, you have to embed technology in an educational environment if you're going to get your student population ready for 21st century workforce. You can't avoid it. I guess the way I would like to think about it more is not so much technology as a distraction, which I think is implied within your question, but rather technology as a learning outcome, and what is the identification of the lessons that a particular learning module needs to be addressing. So for example, I think if it is math proficiency and the understanding of how to have a student be thinking about being proficient in math or in languages or in any other field, if there is a mechanism by which technology can be used to leverage that learning process, then by all means it should be used. But if there's a better way of teaching that learning outcome, then the instructor or the teacher in the classroom really needs to be driving that activity. I think the thing that concerns me the most about technology in the classroom is actually when students start to disengage in the classroom experience and start using technology as a distraction. Social media, they start Facebooking, they start IMing with other friends, and they start Googling things that have nothing to do with the subject matter. And that means that whatever's happening in that classroom is not as focused and probably not as good as it could be. Because in most cases that I've been in a classroom environment, when students are engaged in that learning process, the laptops get closed. And it's more about the interactions with the people in the room or in the space. I also have taught a fair amount of online education, and I'm always impressed with how in-depth students can get in their learning in an online environment. Years ago, the biggest criticism about online learning was that it didn't replicate the classroom. But in many respects, because of the use of technology in a smart way, in a way that actually is leveraging the learning outcomes that you want for a particular course, you can actually have a much higher student engagement level in an online environment that can't be replicated in a face-to-face environment. If I wanted to, for example, get everybody's opinion on a particular topic that we've discussed today in this room, we'd be here for the next 3 or 4 hours. But in an online environment, I can get that opinion in about 15 minutes and have everybody's voices be heard. So again, technology, I think, here needs to be kind of put within the context of the learning, and what is the learning intended to, and what is the learning outcome. And I think that, you know, there's bad teaching and there's good teaching. And when technology is being used by our students as a distraction tool for bad teaching, we need to fix that. But when technology is deployed in a learning environment, I think it is very, very powerful and is actually very consistent with the economic development intentions of an education and getting people ready for the workforce.
So we are a world of digital natives being taught by digital immigrants. And so you can't keep the technology away from our kids. I mean, they are just immersed in it. And I've shared the story real quick in my former school district. A parent came up to me at one of my community meetings, and I knew the parent really well, knew his family really well, and he was concerned that his daughter might have a drug problem. I lifted up some resources, saw him about 2 weeks later, and I said, "How's everything going?" He said, "False alarm." I said, "Well, how do you know?" He said, "Well, you know, I got to admit I'm embarrassed, but you know, our daughter went to go take a shower, so my wife and I went to go search her room. We found all these baggies. So we knew that there was a drug problem here. So my wife pulled the shower curtain with the baggie, accusatory, you know, what are you doing?" Well, what she was doing was she had her iPhone, put it in the baggie so she could text during a shower. Okay? I share that story because that's when it just hit me how immersed our students are with their technology. And so you mentioned engagement. If we try to keep our kids away from their technology during school, it's going to be 7 hours of misery for them. So we have to embrace it. We have to embrace what technology can do. How do we use technology to have our best teachers have even more access? How do we use technology so that students can be engaged in a self-program that will build off of their skills, improve their deficits, while an amazing teacher is working with a smaller group of students to build their literacy and numeracy skills? So we can embrace it as an amazing tool, but a couple things. It will never replace the quality of a teacher. We've got to do something that we're not very good at in public education. That is, before we put the technology in the hands of our students, we have to give it to our teachers first, and we have to train them. Because many of our teachers don't know how to use the technology at the level they need to as an instructional tool. And so we just have to do a better job with that. Now, I think your second question was about the digital divide. I worry about that a lot. Even if we get every one of our schools, and that's our goal in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, by this time next year, every single one of our schools will have the infrastructure to have a BYOT, an emphasis on T, bring your own technology to school. We're still going to have students who don't have that technology, or even worse, don't have it when they go home to have the ability to access the internet. So as a community, this does become a huge community issue. I believe it's an economic development issue too. Again, we're preparing kids for jobs that they're going to have to be conversant with technology. So can we as a Charlotte-Mecklenburg community come together to say, how do we ensure that our community doesn't have a digital divide? And I've really tried to engage a lot of our local lawmakers about ways that we need to think about that.
We're going to take one more because we're running very short on time, and you're the lucky winner.
Oh, thank you. We started the conversation with Newtown and that. And as we take a deeper dive at those persons who unfortunately were the shooters in VTech or Colorado and all of that, to me it just seems so clear that the behavioral health part of that is the dominant piece. That there were so many signs there, we just tended to not really focus on the signs that were there. Do you think it would be something that you could do as educators, who are leaders in education, to take our conversation away from guns? I think that the gun conversation needs to be there, but to put more emphasis on the behavioral health part of what happened there, and try to make that kind of difference?
If I can start on that one, you know, I'm always struck by whenever instances like this happen, and you start listening to the narrative that emerges in the days after a particular shooting. And I don't have any deep down knowledge of this, but many of the people that are often talked about in, for example, the Arizona shooting or the Aurora shooting, had experiences within a higher educational environment, and for whatever reason were taken out of that environment or were kicked out of that environment. So clearly within those structures, and we would say that that's a system working. right? That if there was somebody who was troubled that looked like he was going to be a threat, and they're all men, that they were going to be a threat to themselves or a threat to others, that the university figured out, or the community college figured out, a mechanism by which to extricate that student out of their system. So we would say that that worked. But where it breaks down is there are confidentiality laws around here, and we need to figure out a reasonable and reasoned way around that so that we can actually broaden out that information away from an organization like a community college to the local law enforcement community, where somebody's rights are not being trampled on and where somebody isn't being overly stigmatized in the event that somebody's made a judgment mistake. But you know, I've always been always surprised to hear of these experiences. I mean, the Virginia Tech case, I mean, happened on a university campus, but the Aurora shooting and I believe the Arizona shooting, both of those individuals had experiences within a college context and were taken out of those environments. And we just need to get better at that. And you know, I think that those are really difficult moral and ethical questions that we need to ask ourselves. And that has nothing to do with gun policy whatsoever.
So I think where you're driving us is, can we do a better job of identifying early and then intervening? And as a country, we have to. Again, the thing I caution, because the first thing, again, you start to hear is, well, we have to train teachers and principals to better identify. Now, do we need to play a role in that? Ultimately, probably yes. But again, I just, you know, for everybody saying, well, how do we start comparing our educational systems with China and India, and how do we get better test results compared to those countries? They go to school 240 days a year, about 9 hours a day, compared to our 180, about 7 hours a day. So we're already stressed in terms of the amount of time that we're educating kids versus other countries. And then we layer so many things on our teachers and our principals in our schools that other countries don't have to, because someone else is addressing those needs. Now, ultimately, if we're asked, we will do our role, we'll do it very well, but that training and then putting that additional burden on teachers and principals has a consequence where, again, there are training around literacy, numeracy, doing other things that they're not going to be able to do because we have limited time. Time is a resource. But let's say we go ahead and do that. Even if we do a better job of identifying students and young people who need support, then where does the support come from? Because in public education, as we've grappled with these horrific budget cuts and we've tried to protect the classroom as best we can, where have we made cuts? We've made cuts in social workers. We've made cuts in counselors. We've made cuts in some of the very resources we would have to address the needs that we're lifting up or finding. And so then you say, well, we'll have to, you know, go to the community. Well, where have the community made cuts? And Health and Human Services. So again, you know, I'm not trying to say it's about more resources, but what I'm saying is that it's a challenge. And if you take resources out of the equation, then I'm not sure we're going to really find real solutions.
And I just want to add to that, that if we were to look at more resources for police officers, let's not consider more police officers, but those resources going towards the social workers that you had to cut, the counselors that you had to cut.
Yeah. Well, very quickly, thank you all for coming. Let's thank John and Heath. If you remember nothing else from this, try not to text and shower. And with that, I will turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you. You know, I think one of the neat things about doing this series is that we expect these to be really engaging and thoughtful conversations, and I think you'll agree with me that we saw that here today as well. What is unique about this program, and I think from a fellow educator standpoint, we know that people who go into education don't go into it for the financial rewards. There's really an intrinsic passion about making a difference in communities, and I think we've seen that in both Heath and John here today. Doing what they love, very passionate about it, but a very authentic conversation. So I hope you'll join me in extending our appreciation for your authentic conversation. John, normally as a university employee, you don't get a gift. However, you do get one when you come to Charlotte and you participate in these. So these are a token of our appreciation.
Colors, by the way.
Imagine those colors. A very nice globe to kind of symbolize our Local Leaders Global Impact series. If I can indulge you in just two more things. One is that since I have you all captive in this room, I want to ask you to become ambassadors for me for a moment. And so that is it out on the bar where the food is. First, eat it, because if you don't, I have to box it and get rid of it some other way. So please take some food as you leave. But we have 2 flyers out there, and I'd like you to ask for your help in extending the word on these. This is a commitment from the university to give to educators who we know don't make a lot of money and try and make it easier on them. So the generosity of Johns College, the College of Professional Studies, has a McFarland Scholarship, which is solely for educators in CMS, teachers, administrators, and staff, full-time or part-time. It's a $10,000 scholarship toward a Master of Education degree. And we have 20 of those available. We have not awarded all 20 of those. So we all know you know people who work in Heath's organization. Heath's been great about getting the word out, but we know that word of mouth comes through friends. So please pick up a McFarland Scholarship if you would, please. And if you know a CMS educator who might qualify, please ask them to contact us for that. And then the second one is a graduate education scholarship for any public educator across the state of North Carolina. Again, the generosity of Johns College. We know public educators don't make a lot of money, and so it's not $10,000, but it's a significant, about $2,500 scholarship. Extends to any of our colleagues in the UNC system, NC State, and public educators who are working in K-12. So if you would help us get that word out, we would very much appreciate it. Last, I'd just like to make recognition, it takes a village to educate, and we have a former school board chair in the room, Eric Davis, in the back. Eric, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. And for all of you who support education from K-12 through PH.D, we thank you for your support. We will conclude now, and you're welcome to enjoy the food here, and thank you both for your time today. Thanks, Eric.